Stanford University.
Well, welcome to the History and Geography of Current Global Events. This is episode 3, China, Burma, and the Kokang War of August of this year. I'm going to be talking about the Shan Plateau and the Shan State in Burma or Myanmar, which I think is probably the most geopolitically complicated place in the world. And also a very fraught area. It's about the size of Georgia, about 5 million people. It's an area that has seen tremendous economic boom in the last few years, the northern part especially, which has been peaceful for about 20 years. If you go along the old Burma Road to China, look at it from Google Earth, you'll see a lot of infrastructure, a lot of investment, mostly by China. The so-called Gun Bridge, recently rebuilt, named after its main export across the border from China into the various insurgencies of Burma. Go upstream a little bit and you find lots of buildings. I don't know exactly what they are, almost certainly due to investment from China. There's the actual border along the river. But even if you go into the very remote areas, this is Kokang up along the border with China, which is a Chinese ethnic area, or to its special region number 1. What that means is that it's not administered by Burma, it never has been, or the United Wa State special region number 2 to the south and its main ally. Even in these rugged areas, you'll find a tremendous amount of investment. Pangsang, the unofficial capital of the Wa State, now has, according to the Wikipedia, quite a lively scene with bowling alleys, casinos, especially casinos. There's a lot of investment in gambling recently. And it's important to note that, according to the Wikipedia, what are the Wa famous for? Well, they were the Wild Wa, famous for their savage behavior. Well, actually, there were the Wild Wa and the Tame Wa, or as the Chinese put it, the Cooked Wa and the Raw Wa, living in these remote areas. Very much a transformed economy over the last 20 years. Investment streaming in, and pretty seedy sort of investment. The area is known for its drug production, its gun running, human trafficking, and the like. In the midst of the Wa areas, we can find some pretty spectacular personal investment. Here's the Hui Zhegang, one of the Wa commanders, Chinese by birth, close connection between the Chinese and the Wa, with his maximum security mansion, which he just gave up and donated to the Wa state, which was a good idea because he knew what was happening. What the Wikipedia refers to as the Kokang incident of August this year. Burma sent its army unannounced to search for drug labs in the capital of Kokang State, a city of about 30,000. The militia there, the Myanmar Democratic Alliance Army, panicked and fled to China with almost the entire population of the city, some 30,000 people, across the border almost immediately. Fighting then broke out, a little hit-and-run skirmishes as the Myanmar Democratic Alliance Army, and especially its ally, the United Wa State Army and the Kachin Independence Army, started sniping at the Burmese troops as they moved into the area. China evidently was ready for this. There was not a refugee crisis because they had the tents and the material all set up, which led a lot of these people to think that they had been betrayed by China. On the other hand, China was none too pleased with the events, extremely upset and furious at the government of Burma. Burma was upset at China being upset at them, so upset that they mentioned the Dalai Lama visiting Taiwan for the first time ever, I believe. There's a lot behind this. One of the main things that's behind it is Burma's very large deposits of oil and especially natural gas, which are coming online, and very ambitious pipeline projects passing right through this area. China wants Burma's oil, and China also wants oil from the Middle East to flow through Burma and not have to go through the circuitous route through the Straits of Malacca. So this is seen by China as essential to their energy strategy. China and Burma have much deeper geopolitical ties. One place to see this is the Coco Island, just north of India's Andaman Islands, which is Burmese territory. And if you look at it on Google Earth, you'll see some big developments. It's leased out to China, and this is all about spying on India. At least that's what most people think. China and Burma deny this, but that's what the intelligence community suspects. Even more grandiose plans are in store for the Salween River, which is undammed, very wild river, and one with a tremendous amount of water that drops many meters of elevation, making it a river of tremendous hydroelectric potential. And China now has ambitious plans to produce renewable energy, and dam building is certainly one of the places it's looking. In China itself, on the Salween, there are plans for, you can see, a whole series of dams, and there are also plans for dams in the Salween River in Burma, dams that would be constructed and financed by China, energy going either to China or, in many cases, to Thailand. Here is the proposed Upper Salween River site right there in the Kokang territory, this rebellious area, and right where the United Wa state exists. Google Earth showing the dam site. You can see it's an excellent dam site, and I just sort of estimated the area that would be flooded. But that's actually nothing compared to downstream dams. Here's a dam being planned, the Tasong Dam, which would flood out hundreds of thousands of people, many, many villages. It's planned. I'd be very surprised if it's built anytime soon, because it's not an area that is going to sit by passively while the bulldozers come in and make way. With all this investment and activity, China and Burma together over the last 4 years have decided that they need to make this wild area a little bit tamer. China is very concerned about heroin and methamphetamine streaming from the factories of the Wa state and Kokang into its territory. And so just the last couple of years, China and Burma together have been putting the squeeze on the drug business. So that's both heroin and methamphetamines. If you read in the press, you'll often find this portrayed as a very successful case. Here's the Golden Triangle, which was 15 years ago by far and away the largest opium producer in the world. Now is a shadow of its former self as far as the drug market concerns. And of course, Afghanistan today is where the game is. Now, these actually may be connected. As the drug market has been squeezed here, of course, that creates openings for the Afghan producers to move in. If you look at, this is from a military sort of think tank organization strategy page. If you look at what they say about it, they'll say that, well, it's pretty much over, right? Heroin is going to end. The Wa are going to be defeated and disarmed, and that's going to be the end of the Golden Triangle. Those who know a little bit about the history and geography of this region come to a different conclusion. Right? One of the problems is people who work on the policy side of things generally don't put a great store on knowledge of history and geography. I think that's one of the things that led us into Iraq and other sorts of debacles that the U.S. is engaged in. I think this is another clear case. Those who know, like the Shan Herald news agency out of Chiang Mai, Thailand, know that even though the Wa and the Kokang Chinese have had the squeeze put on them, it doesn't mean drug production has ended. Yes, opium is way down. Methamphetamines are not down nearly as much. It's just other groups are being favored in this very complicated situation, including Burma's military seems to have its hands very deeply involved in the drug game. And they also expect that poppy cultivation is probably going to increase. This sort of pressure that Burma and China are putting on these areas is resulting in a humanitarian crisis. There's not enough food in many of these areas. And I would suspect people are going to be turning once again to opium. Not easy to get rid of it. So as part of my broader critique of those schools of policy studies that ignore history and geography, I'll start with a very basic point. We see a map like this, a CIA map of Burma, and yes, we may have some debates over whether to call it Myanmar, as its government does, or Burma, as the Democratic opposition insists on calling it. There's a little doubt that it's a coherent country, neatly bounded, a sovereign entity. No, not the case, has never been the case. Burma has never administered all of its territories. The areas outside that line, many of them have never been taxed, have never been administered. There's been no education. There's been no building. Not in all these areas, but certainly in many of them. Burma is not a coherent, certainly, nation-state. Of course, there are plenty other of these pseudo-states that litter our map, from Somalia to Bosnia and Herzegovina to Western Sahara. we are, I think, very much misled by the map. We see these entities and assume that they exist, and many of them, well, certainly these, are delusional. Now, it's a commonly agreed upon delusion. All heads of state share in this, and so it gives it a great power, but it doesn't mean that these are existing geopolitical structures that we can understand in that sense. It's not just at the country level. Look at the sort of world regional level. We organize our studies of the world around regions, and we hard and fast separate Southeast Asia from East Asia with that line running right through this natural geophysical area, the Yunnan Plateau of China, the Shan Plateau of Burma. It's all one sort of unit with a very, very much a shared cultural and political history, which we have to understand if we want to know what's going on today. This area, this plateau zone, was probably one of the main centers of agricultural innovation 10,000 years ago. There's debates about this, but a number of crops, including rice, may have been domesticated here. An area that has produced the area of genesis of some of the world's largest language families, from Tibeto-Burman, maybe all of Sino-Tibetan, Austroasiatic, Austronesian, Thai, Kadai. These are huge language families spread over a vast area. Many linguists think they originated in this plateau zone. It's not a forbidding zone. Yes, it has some deep canyons that separates different areas, and that actually can lend itself to linguistic diversification. But it also has a lot of fertile areas, and it's also relatively salubrious. It's a high enough elevation to not much malaria. And you have had a long history of peoples moving out of the plateau further south into Southeast Asia. Go back to 800 CE. Again, Thomas Lessman's very interesting maps of the time and place. You can see the Tang Empire in China, period of the strong Tibetan Empire, and the state of Nanzhou right there in what is now Yunnan. Very complicated state, many different ethnic groups. We don't understand it all that well. It was throughout this period, earlier and subsequent to this, we had this continuing movement of people. The Tibeto-Burmese people, various different ethnic groups, moving out of the highlands into the lowland area of what is now central Burma. We have the various Thai peoples moving out from an area further to the east onto the plateau and eventually down south again. So this is a continuing process of movement which results historically in a great diversity of ethnic groups intermingled in a very complicated way. The Thai ended up being the largest group in the Shan Plateau. Shan is just Burman for Thai. The Shan themselves would call themselves Thai. The Thai, of all the different Thai groups, from the Siamese of what is now Thailand to the Shan and others, seem to have spread partly because of certain agricultural techniques that they mastered. What they particularly mastered was canal irrigation and paddy field rice in upstream areas, learning how to control relatively fast-flowing rivers with weirs and small dams to build large irrigated rice up in the plateau area. And it's said in the Shan Plateau, in Leach's classic work on the political systems of Highland Burma, he said if you convert to Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism, and you grow irrigated wet rice in the Shan Plateau, you will become Shan. So, of course, there's a lot of ethnic movement as people assume different identities based partly on their way of life. The non-Shan peoples, often called tribal peoples of the region, generally swidden cultivators. From Google Earth today, we can see areas of lots of patchwork in the mountains where slash and burn cultivation is practiced. And some of these highland areas, though, also ended up building dense population. The higher up you go, the less malaria there is, and the healthier they are. And so even in parts of Wa State, you can find now intense cultivation with permanent fields and these sort of terraces built. That's a more recent phenomenon. If we go back to our historical narrative here, in the late 1200s was the period when what is now Yunnan, China, became part of East Asian political system, if you will. It was the Mongols who first did it. Mongols trying to conquer the southern Sung dynasty in China, and they couldn't do it in a direct attack, so they came through the Yunnan Plateau and attacked from the back, incorporated this area into their Yuan dynasty, and ever since then it has been part of China. Large-scale movement of Han Chinese into the area. That also resulted in a big movement of Thai people out of the area. As Chinese come in, many Thai come out, and that's when what is now Thailand becomes Thai, essentially. Thai groups moving into what is now Thailand and Laos, merging with the Khmer, or Khmer, the Cambodians, and forming really a sort of a syncretic civilization. Just as the Burmans earlier had merged with the Mon of Pegu that you can see there. It's often said that the Burmans were like the Romans to the Mon Greek, or the Thai were like the Romans to the Khmer and Mon Greek. In other words, the lowland peoples giving the sort of high civilization to these newcomers, more martial cultures, and very much a combining of those cultural traditions. Eventually, this is a current map, but eventually the Shan Plateau, and there's the Shan state, built up this very complicated ethnic mosaic. So the Shan there in purple being the dominant group, Thai-speaking peoples, Theravada Buddhists, conceiving of themselves as carriers of a high civilization. The Wa up in the more rugged, remote areas, animists, swidden cultivators, later adopting some permanent field agriculture and terraces as they became more numerous, speaking a language related to Khmer of Cambodia. Paolung, these are Buddhists, but speaking a language related to Wa. And we can go through some of the other groups, Kachin, sort of a catch-all term for a complex series of ethnic groups. Mongla, others. In the far south, an interesting group called the Pa'o, or also called as the Black Karen. The point is, though, is that you had this complex system of ethnic groups, a lot of marriage across these lines, a lot of transformation. As I said, people can become Shan or even could become Wa, depending on where they lived, the clothes they would wear, the lifestyle that they would take on. Also, though, a lot of animosity. The Shan were, in general, the lords of this region. The Wa certainly were not. That led to a long dynamic of tension between the two. Shan getting power over some Wa areas, especially the areas of the so-called tame or cooked Wa. The more remote areas retaining a small-scale sort of tribal system. We move up to about 1500 now. We see a number of lowland Thai kingdoms, Chiang Mai, Laos, Siam being established. And we see the Shan here. The map makes it seem as if they were a unified kingdom. They really weren't. They were a series of small-scale kingdoms, but powerful nonetheless. And this is a period in Burma where the Ava dynasty was under continual threat from the Shan. Tremendous amount of Shan raiding. In fact, the Burman monarchy actually moved out of the central plain to get away from the Shan. But eventually a compromise essentially was reached where the Shan kings, Saufas they're called, small-scale kings, accepted Burman suzerainty in exchange for having basically complete autonomy, a ceremonial relationship. And that actually gave great power to the Burmese state. And there were several periods in the mid-1500s and in the late 1700s when the Burmese state created a large empire, conquering areas in what is now Thailand and even India. There's the Shan Plateau, working with the Shan. So continuing tension between the Burmans and the Shan, but also a lot of cooperation in this period. And that's one of the things that gave might to the Burmese empire. Conquering Manipur in what is now India, conquering central Thailand. Actually, though, these conquests were always disastrous. Burma has this long history of over-ambitious emperors trying to conquer neighbors, succeeding, and then being overextended and wrecking the empire. So it happened on several occasions. Next big event that happened in the region under our consideration is the Ming loyalists fleeing from the Qing advance in the mid-1600s. So as the Manchus moved down to conquer China, Ming loyalists retreated to the coastal area, to Yunnan, tried to hold out there for a while with some success, ultimately not successful, but one small group did maintain independence in the Kokang area of what is now Burma. The Yang clan moving into this rugged area, living cheek by jowl with the Wa tribal people, eventually working very close to them and forming their own, well, what would you call it? It's not a very small-scale state, if you will. And this Yang dynasty persisted for several hundred years in this zone. By 1800, you look at a map. Here's a Wikipedia map of Southeast Asia, and we see Burma nicely bounded again. The same notion of our borders between states being hard and fast. That's how we map our countries. That's how we map the past. But it's certainly not appropriate for most past states. Those who've looked in detail at the political geography of traditional Southeast Asia describe not tightly bounded states, but loose circles of ritual power and suzerainty established over a broad area. So this is looking at an earlier period and looking at Thailand, but seeing these sort of concentric circles of power, where you may have a king in Ayutthaya in Thailand, for example, and you'll have lesser kings paying homage to him, but that didn't mean that they weren't sovereign in their own right. So a much more complicated system. What Thailand or Siam had to do was to construct its geobody. In other words, to make that shape that we see on the map a reality, doing that through surveying, through mapping, and through military expeditions. Siam did that in the late 1800s, as Tongchai Winnichuk so brilliantly shows in Siam map. Burma never did it, never even came close to it. And in fact, again on this map, we see Assam as part of the Burmese Empire. So often, our historical maps show empires at their height, even if that height was 2 or 3 years, and even if that conquest proved their undoing. Well, that's exactly what happened here. Conquering of Assam didn't make the British East India Company very happy, and they marched in the First Anglo-Burmese War and took Assam from them. Okay, here we see it here, the British East India coming in here in pink. And actually, that's not a bad map because those green areas shows places that were part of the Burmese Empire but were not administered by Burma, that were sort of loosely affiliated with it. That wasn't enough for the British East India Company, and a series of 3 wars. Britain conquered first the coastal zones of Burma, then lowland Burma, then all of Burma in the 1880s. But conquering all of Burma didn't mean that they had the Shan Highlands, because, yes, part of Burma, but not administered by Burma, not really part of it. So they had to go in and conquer, but they didn't conquer it. They just made the same sort of deals with the Shan kings that the Burmese had done. Ritual subjugation, essentially. Put some British residents up there who give some advice, interfere if foreign affairs are not quite going their way, but basically let the Shan kings run their own show as they had always done. Here's a map, a British-produced map from the time showing what was left of Burma before the British finally took it over, but showing the Burmese Shan states as completely independent, also showing Shan states in northern Thailand. You usually would call that Chiang Mai, but you could certainly classify them as Shan as well. Under British rule, you had the 33 Saufas, or kings of the Shan state, and there are their territories mapped out. Some of them in the western part were tiny, a series of villages. Others, like Kengtung, were large enough to be considerably sized kingdoms. Note the extension all the way over to the Mekong River. That's why Burma today has the extension to the Mekong River. Wa states were not really states because most of this area was wild, unadministered, tribal in organization. Some of the Wa were under rule of Shan, that's true, and actually some of the Wa themselves started building small-scale state-like organizations. There was a You might think a continuum from the states of the Shan to the tribal, small-scale societies of the Hua Highlands. Kokang, the Chinese area here, is shown as if it's part of Xuanhui, one of these Shan states, but it was autonomous. It wasn't ruled by it. Again, there was a relationship between the Yang clan and the south of Shenhui, but it was a ritual relationship, much more than one of sort of actually ruling them. 1892, Britain fixes its border with China. Eric will tell us all about that eventually, and we're waiting for his work on that score. 1922, the British finally start doing a little bit more up in the Shan Highlands, trying to federate the Shan states, get them to work together. They still didn't administer it. Again, here's Kokang, and it was looked after by a British resident in Lashio, many, many miles away. So the British basically had nothing to do with the Hua states or the Shan states, or at least very little to do with it. In World War II, there was plenty of fighting in this area because the Japanese moved in, which you can see in red, and the British pulling out. Burma becomes a tremendously important theater of war because of the supply routes from India into China, as the Chinese had retreated up the Yangtze River. Chinese troops actually come into the Shan states at this time, but are defeated. Eventually what happens to the Kengtung area, this largest of the Shan states, is Thailand takes it over during the war. Thailand did ally itself with Japan, although they actually, the Thai ambassador never informed the United States that Thailand declared war on the U.S. And the U.S. did indeed decide that Thailand was not an enemy, which infuriated Winston Churchill. He certainly wanted to treat them as an enemy afterwards. So Thailand took over a part of this area. But it was a scene of a lot of fighting because of the Burma Road. And you can see that there's, again, our Kokang area very close to it. And in fact, right after the war, Kokang became the 34th Shan state. The British gave its leader the official title of Saufa, Shan King, Kinglet, because of the help they had given to the British during the war period. After the war, Burma becomes independent in 1948, but it is a very rough and rocky independence, to be sure. Here's Burma 1953. We see many areas of Burmese Communist Party power fighting hard against the government, coming, well, I wouldn't say close to overthrowing it, but certainly putting it in precarious footing. What's more interesting is what happened from the Chinese side. The Kuomintang, the Chinese nationalists, Chiang Kai-shek's forces moving in a big way. Yes, most of them went to Taiwan, but a large contingent went across the border, the soft border, if you will, into the Shan states and established military bases. What was the idea? The idea was that they would then use that as a platform to invade China and take it over again. The CIA got heavily involved with this. The CIA agents were there, and of course they had to fund this. Well, how do you suppose they funded it? Through opium and heroin. CIA very deeply involved in setting up the narcotics industry in this zone, because that's how the Kuomintang was indeed funded. So of course there had been opium there for a long time. That's nothing new. But the heroin labs, this sort of thing, according to Al McCoy at any rate, dates to this period. Here's a map just showing again the border zone, plans for the invasion. Actually, there were 3 invasions, all defeated invasions of China, and there were planes going back and forth with Taiwan. The Burmese knew that the U.S. was supporting them. That's why Burma would have nothing to do with U.S. Cold War alliance plans. The United States built up SEATO, the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization. Burma said, no thanks. Well, here's the CIA up in the highlands doing this drug running and building up this Kuomintang army. The army wasn't focused on Burma, but it was controlling a lot of the territory. In fact, threatening at times to take over the entire Shan state. Eventually, after a series of defeats, the Kuomintang in Burma retreat down to the Thai border, drop the idea of conquering China, and simply become a drug gang, as most people would say it. An organization making a lot of money off heroin. And for that, you want to be on the Thai border because that's the key to your markets at that time, was the border with Thailand. Burma's real threat in this early period, though, wasn't the Kuomintang, it wasn't the communists so much, it was the Karen, a group about 7 million strong on the border with Burma and China, a group that the British had favored. About a third of them converted to Protestant Christianity, educated in British schools. Britain used a lot of Karen in the civil service and in the military. The lowland Burmans, of course, hated that, viewing the Karen as tribal, rude, crude people from the hills with power over the lowland Theravada Buddhist civilized Burmans. So there was plenty of tension there. Karen armies actually came within 50 miles of Rangoon at one time. So this was a huge threat to Burma, and ultimately they were able to stave off the disaster. Here's a map showing all the different ethnic groups of Burma, well, not all, some of the main ethnic groups of Burma, with the Burmans, the Burmese speakers in the central part. But you can just see on this colorful map that the entire peripheral zone inhabited by non-Burmans, that's 40% of the population of the country. As Burma had this very shaky parliamentary period in the 1950s, problems continued to erupt on the periphery, not just with the Karen, but with other groups. In 1959, the Shan states became very restive as Burma, the Burmese government, worked to dismantle the feudal system, essentially, to pension off the Saufas, the kinglets of the Shan Plateau, and to turn the Shan state into one, sort of this congeries of quasi-independent kingdoms into a state of Burma. Of course, the Shan leaders said what they pushed for was a federal system in Burma that would give the Shan state a tremendous amount of autonomy. So they resisted any movement towards a unitary state, and they claimed that they had a constitutional right to secede. 61, the Kachin, this is actually a group of 5 or 6 different languages in the north, who are not Buddhists, who were at least at this time animists, began a major rebellion in 1961 when the UNU government declared Buddhism the state religion of Burma. That was something that non-Buddhists were not very happy with, so a new rebellion emerges. So now Burma looking shakier than ever. Ethnic rebellions, you still have communist groups, the Rohingya. I have to add them to the map. Those are Muslim population in the coast who are probably the most discriminated against of all people of Burma today. So anyway, Ne Win in 1962 put an end to the parliamentary system, a military coup established, and Burma took the path to the Burmese road to socialism, or Buddhist socialism, as it's been more appropriately termed, the Burma road to poverty, or I might call it the Burman road to failed imperialism. Burma now was going to be a state absolutely dominated by the Burmans, or Bamar, the largest ethnic group. It was going to be a Buddhist state, it was going to be a unitary state, and it was going to be a state isolated from the rest of the world. Border with China closed off. Foreign trade almost comes to an end. During this period, it was very difficult even to go to Burma. It was one of the most isolated parts of the world for a long period. 1964, 2 years later, the Shan, as you might expect, launched a massive rebellion. So the Shan are now rebelling. A few years later, tensions are building up with China. As I said before, the Chinese border has been closed. There are a lot of Chinese in Burma, as was true in elsewhere in Southeast Asia. In Rangoon, they were the dominant commercial class. Under Ne Win's Burmese socialism, the Chinese were viewed as a foreign element, as well as a capitalist element. And there were massive so-called ethnic riots in 1967 in Rangoon, which basically involved burning the Chinese out and driving them out. This, not surprisingly, infuriated the government of China. We're in the Cultural Revolution at this time, and China responds by sending in Red Guard units, military units, And where do they send them? Right across the border, well, into Kokang, Han Chinese area, and into the Wa states. And especially in these areas, prove very successful. They're very successful in recruiting the local people, the Kokang Chinese, and especially the Wa, to their side. Not all of them, but most of them. The Wa become the bulk of the Red Army in Burma fighting against the Burmese government. At the same time, the Burmese Communist Party is losing its territory in the south in various mountain areas. So Burman communists are coming up into this area as well, working with the Chinese, but it's the Wa who are the foot soldiers. And there are major battles, battles which also involve the human wave strategy of just massive numbers of people assaulting positions and being mowed down. So the Wa don't have many leadership positions, but they're sort of given this messianic role that they are going to be the people who are going to conquer all of Burma and redeem it and turn it into a socialist or communist state. And for the Wa, who had been at the bottom of the hierarchy, these tribal peoples victimized by the Shan and by others, I guess this is a heavy brew, and they take to it in quite a large way. Many other ethnic areas, I should say the stippling on this map just shows ethnic armies in rebellion against Burma. Areas I've highlighted in red are those that are by the late 60s, early 70s under Chinese communist leadership, or at least close connections with them. Of course, there are weapons coming in it. Ironically, this was actually, I think, quite beneficial for the Burmese government, because what it did was split many of these ethnic militias. So you end up, we can go through all the ranks of all these different ethnic groups. You'll have some of them joining the communists, others not. Even with the Wa. One time, Wa were fighting in 5 separate armies, fighting against each other. They are the mass of the troops, but they are often cannon fodder for different groups. As Burma becomes more and more of a failed economy during this period, as the Burmese path to socialism, or poverty, if you will, continues on its merry way, the Karen becomes stronger and stronger. It's estimated that by the early 1980s, the Karen economy, according to some estimates, was as large as the economy of Burma. Why? It's because that's where all the goods from the exterior world came into Burma. Burma put up these huge tariff barriers, but that's not going to stop trade. It's going to come in from somewhere. It's going to come from Thailand through the Karen into Burma. So the Karen were building their own republic, their own insurgent state in this period. And again, seen as the biggest threat to Burma because they are close to the lowlands. There are actually a lot of Karen in the lowlands, right around Rangoon. So that's seen as a huge threat. But, of course, it's not the only one. And you get into the intricacies of Shan state politics, you come across fascinating characters like Kun Sa, Chinese father, Shan mother, actually had worked with Ne Win, was imprisoned in Thailand. Anyway, eventually, the Thai government, it looks like, sets up Kun Sa and his Mong Thai army to get control over that borderland with Thailand where all the drugs are coming from Burma into Thailand. 1985 is the year. I don't know how precise that map is. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out exactly what territory the Mong Thai army controlled. But these were major opium-producing areas, and most importantly, area of smuggling of opium down into Thailand. And he built up this army of about 15 to 20,000 strong. Lots of support from Thailand, again, in creating it. So you can see what desperate situation Burma was in by the late 1980s. What really set it over the edge was demonetization. September 5th, the Burmese government simply canceled most of their banknotes. No good anymore. Most of the country's wealth wiped out. And Ne Win government introduced new banknotes in denominations of 40 and 90 chot. Why is that? Well, because of numerology. Apparently, Ne Win really liked the number 9, and he wanted only banknotes divisible by 9. Well, is it successful? Well, from the Wikipedia, what is the Burmese chot worth today? Well, $5 or $6 officially. 800 to 1,300 on the black market. Those are current rates. So Burma is a country with an irregular financial foundation, if you will. Of course, that hasn't stopped trade with China. This catastrophe led to the August 8, 1988 uprising, the 888 uprising in Burma, where Aung San Suu Kyi, daughter of the father figure of Burma, Aung San, takes up the role as the leader of the democratic opposition, but of course that is crushed the next month. New government comes in, lovely name of SLORC, the State Law and Order Restoration Council, renamed the country the Union of Myanmar rather than Burma. So today, if you call it Myanmar or Myanmar, generally you're maybe not siding with the government, but you're granting it a certain amount of legitimacy, whereas people like Aung San Suu Kyi insist that you call it Burma to distance yourself from the government. So anyway, it's going to be a new show in Burma. They're dropping this isolationistic Burmese path to socialism. One general in particular, Khin Yu, takes on the task of trying to solve the problem of all these insurgencies. Well, he can't solve them all, but he figures he can solve a lot of them simply by creating ceasefires. Neither war nor peace. What Burma wants to do is to make a deal with most of the ethnic armies. We'll leave you alone. You leave us alone. We're not going to fight anymore. You run your own show, so that Burma could concentrate its ethnic might against the Karen and against Kun Sa and his Mong Thai army, which were seen as the bigger threats. A divide and conquer policy, which was very successful. He went on to become prime minister. It looks like actually he wasn't tough enough. A couple years ago, he was ousted, now sentenced to prison by people who wanted more hardcore dealings with the ethnic minorities, or at least that's often assumed to be. One of the things that came in with the new government is dropping of these barriers, or at least reducing the tariff barriers. Burma going from this isolationistic state to a more normal state, or a more normal repressive military dictatorship, or one that's going to engage with the rest of the world, particularly with China. What's the problem? There's the main trade route to China, and you have these armies of dedicated Maoist revolutionaries with this messianic complex, and they're tens of thousands of Wa soldiers. That's a problem. But lo and behold, with Kim Yu and with Chinese help and who knows what sort of intrigue, Kokang and the Wa have a mutiny, kick out the communists in 1989, and go to being just a normal ethnic insurgency, ethnic rebellious army type of situation. End of communism in this region. China's quite happy with that. China wants trade with Burma. They don't want to be supporting these Maoist insurgents in the region anymore. And this was just from earlier this year, from March, a celebration showing it. Meanwhile, the drug business goes on apace. Besides our traditional product of opium and heroin, now we have methamphetamines coming on in a big way. On that map, you can see it, the brown circles are all meth labs. This is from a little bit later. The other, the square areas are heroin refineries. Of course, with methamphetamine, you need complicated precursor chemicals. Those are coming from, believed to be mostly from Chinese gangs. But we can see from this map a couple of different regions. So here's Kun Sa's Mong Thai army in the south. That's the prime territory, because that's the Thai border. So we have close relationships with Thailand, with corrupt Thai generals and policemen. We have antagonistic relations with Burma, and we have very antagonistic relations with the Wa. The Wa and the Shan, long heritage of distrust, and that's certainly happening now as they're competing for drug markets. Meanwhile, up in the Kokang and Wa area, we have another real concentration of drug labs. And here we've got tight ties with China, China supplying them with precursor chemicals. I shouldn't say China. Chinese criminal syndicates supplying them with the chemicals needed to make meth. China supplying guns. And now we have neutral relations with the Burmese government because of the ceasefire. So that sets hostile relations again with the Shan. That sets up a very difficult dynamic for Kun Sa and his Mong Thai army. Because he's got the Wa on one side, he's got the Tatmadaw, the Burmese army, on the other. Anyway, how big was this United Wa army, or how big is it today? Estimates are 20 to 25,000 troops, tightly organized, very hierarchical, perhaps something inherited from the period when the Chinese communists came in and organized them. Is it a narco army or a nationalist party? Well, a bit of both. The Wa are often accused of being the prime narcotics gang, but everyone up here is involved with narcotics. So they've sort of been, as they say, unfairly picked on for this activity. Flying around the Wa states on Google Earth, you can certainly see some interesting looking buildings. I assume that's a drug lab. I can't say for certain, but there are lots of them. They are very, very common. Anyway, in mid-90s, it's time to move. So what's the Burmese government doing? They're maneuvering to try to undermine this Mong Thai army of Kun Sa. So they're attacking, and they're getting the Wa to attack as well. And the Wa are very happy to do so because they want that territory on the border so they can trade into China, into Thailand, where most of the drugs are coming out. So essentially, Kun Sa is defeated. His army withdraws. This is 1996. There are still elements around of his army, so they, even though defeated, they didn't entirely disappear. The map shows forced relocation, tremendous amounts of forced relocation as the Burmese are doing this. Even the Wa are doing it. They're moving ethnic groups around. They're moving people into the southern area so that they can cement control over it. Main area of forced relocation, and then lots of refugees streaming into Thailand. No surprise there. So here's 1996. Kun Sa, captured and defeated, finally died last year. And a big gain for the government of Burma. Next year it has another gain, if you will. 1997 is the year of the Asian economic crisis that started in Thailand. 2 years earlier, Vietnam had joined ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian States. And then in 1997, Burma joins and Laos joins. Cambodia joins 2 years later. This is important because basically what the leaders of Southeast Asian nations want to engage Burma. They want to bring it into the fold, into this deliberative process of Southeast Asian diplomacy, which stresses non-interference in other countries, but peaceful border situations, drop all claims to other countries' territories, and let's develop Southeast Asia together. This was a huge blow to groups like the Karen, because no longer is Thailand going to give them military sanctuary. Now Thai loggers get to go into Burma and log teak. No more teak in Thailand, no more logging in Thailand, but there's plenty in Burma. So now Thailand is engaging Burma in this sense, but it's undermining positions for some of the insurgent armies like the Karen as well. So Burma is definitely getting stronger at this time. So we have then, by the late 1990s, early years of the new millennium, we have the United Wa State and its close allies in Kokang, the Chinese area. The Wa State now has a southern branch and a southern military command right there in the border territory. It makes it a very powerful organization. Meanwhile, what the Burma has done is gone into these other areas vacated by Kun Sa and organized very small-scale militias. Amazing mapping job here. I'm just in awe of some of these Shan reporters who are able to do this kind of mapping. But create these small pro-junta, pro-Burmese military militias who, of course, have a free hand with the amphetamine and the opium market, loyal to Burma. We have other ones of these same sort of pro-junta militias forming up in the north, a crucial zone because that's the China trade area. We have what's left of the Mong Thai army in various locations, so they're not totally defeated. But again, these are Shan troops who continue to fight. So that's the situation for a number of years. And then, lo and behold, 2003, 2004, Burma and China start changing the rules of the game. Suddenly their allies, well, not allies, suddenly these ceasefire militia zones, the United Wa State Army, Kokang, these areas that have just been running their own show, minimal interference, powerful armies, big drug trade, suddenly both Burma and China are putting the squeeze on them to reduce their production of drugs. Opium bans, and actually this is from the Transnational Institute, have driven communities into chronic poverty. But because Chinese gangs are so important in bringing in the precursor chemicals for meth, China is worried about meth spreading in China, is worried about heroin addiction problem. So they're putting the squeeze on the suppliers. And to outsiders, this looks like a very successful effort of drug eradication. To the Kokang and the Wa, it looks like a real threat to their livelihood. That's one of the things that's been responsible for this huge upsurge in gambling. So casinos have been going in partly to replace lost revenue from heroin and meth. Chinese are also pushing for rubber plantations. It hardly seems like a place that's going to be very profitable for rubber. I spent a lot of time on Google Earth looking for plantations. I think that's probably tea. But it's interesting. The yellow line is where Google Earth is saying the border is, but it's actually the red line I put in on the river. And going through Google Earth, you'll find lots of plantations on the China side of the border. You go to the Burma side, and I don't find them at all. But evidently, they're putting them in now, last few years. I don't think it's going to be tremendously profitable. So anyway, squeeze being put on drug producers, which is causing economic havoc. But the big thing that set off the current war was an action of the Burmese government. Now, Burma now is feeling strong. All this trade with China, they basically crushed the Karen. The Shan, there's still a South Shan State Army that's fighting, but it's a fragment of what it used to be. The Burmese government is feeling strong, and so they decided, okay, now it's time to get rid of all these ceasefire militias. And what we can do is fold them into the structure of the Burmese army. Send out Burmese commanders. They're able to keep some of their officers, but have a set number of high-level officers and turn them into border guards. So Burma goes around now saying, yes, you are going to the Wa here, saying, you're going to become a border security force. Burmese officers, Burman officers, I should say, and if you don't like that, you can go back to where you came from. So Burma had been very respectful of the Wa. They had worked with them to defeat Kun Sa, but now they're putting the military squeeze on it. And of course, the Wa don't want that to happen. So lots of politics going on. Now the Shan State, this is a group related to Kun Sa's former army. To be quite honest, I really tried to get all these militias straight. I figured that's the way I deal with these things. I'll just learn all of them and learn all their names. And I gave up because every couple of years they're changing and reaffiliating and getting new names and the like. But the Shan State Army never signed a ceasefire with Burma. This history of intense animosity with the Wa. Well, now they're talking to the Wa leadership. Now they're saying maybe it's time for us to form an alliance. It's time to win over the SPDC's former allies. That's the State Peace and Development Council. That's what the government of Burma now calls itself. We've got some Orwellian terminology when we look at Burmese politics. And here's what they're doing. Again, just to give you a flavor of this. They're already allied with the Lahu Democratic Union and the Pa'o Liberation Organization, the Thai Coordination Committee, and now they form the Shan State Congress and the Six-State Military Alliance with the Arakan Liberation Party, the Chin National Front, the Kachin National Organization, the Karen National Union, the Karenni National Progressive Party. Burma's planning elections next year. They want this to be, well, they'll be fake elections, but they want it to be sort of a showcase. And so here's these groups with their counter move, forming alliances again. Another tremendous map. This is from the Irrawaddy, great local newspaper showing arrow pointing to Kokang in the recent war, showing various ceasefire militias. So here's the United Wa State Army and its two branches, and here are some of its strong allies, the Kachin Independence Organization, the Mong La Group, so it's got these strong allies. Here's the Shan State Army, its traditional enemies that it's now talking to. Trying to build up a front and trying to resist Burma's army. Sorry, let me run through those again. Anyway, we're now up to the events of August. We're up to the Burmese army coming in unannounced into Kokang. Here's the capital city, Lao Kai, of Kokang, and this city just empties out. As I said, people flee to China. Most of them have not returned. It only has a small bit of its population. Meanwhile, people are going hungry. This is an area that has not been food self-sufficient for a long time. This has been a drug-producing, food importing region. And so now people are going hungry. Lo and behold, the Chinese, of course, are involved. The Wa have always looked at Chinese as their benefactors, as their protectors, as the source of their weapons. And they're wondering what's going on. Is China now selling them out to Burma? Chinese delegation going across into the United Wa State. I should say, too, this United Wa State, their administrative language is Chinese. Virtually everything owned in that city is owned by Chinese. I mean, it's this interesting alliance of the Chinese and the Wa people to create this insurgent state. Now, what do you suppose Burma's army is doing? Suddenly, it's holding out the olive branch to the South Shan State Army. It was one of the groups that never signed a peace fire, that continued to fight against Burma all along. Well, the last thing the Burmese government wants is an alliance between the Wa and the Shan, so they're holding out an olive branch, saying, oh, now we can have a nice little ceasefire. Again, the divide and rule strategy. Meanwhile, lots of action on the Wa front. I find it absolutely amazing that from the Shan News Agency we can find out about the internal workings of the Wa Army, who's being promoted, who isn't, get photographs of them. Burma just this was last Thursday, ordered its little militias that are under its control or really linked to it. They're ordered to expand. Now they're not even sparing 12-year-olds. So the human rights violations are fairly extraordinary, but Burma's coming into, again, to these tribal areas, those who've allied with Burma, expand your militias. Don't care what you need to do. And this is from today, from the Shan Herald. Boom day's over for the Wa, basically recounting recent seizures of methamphetamines, and there have been some huge ones lately. September 27th, 400,000 pills seized. September 11th, 3 million methamphetamine tablets seized. So one thing that Burma is trying to do to undercut the Wa is to attack their drug business. Finally, I believe this is my last slide. If we want to understand Shan State politics, you have to understand it as a very complicated game of chess, where we've had Burma and Thailand and China manipulating. But within the area, the Shan and the Wa, traditional enemies, so with the Wa in their two-part area. Now, what's going to happen? I imagine lots of negotiations are going on. Meanwhile, the Wa are trying to build up alliances with other ethnic militias to create sort of a cordon to keep the Burmese army out. They're very much benefited by the Salween River and its deep canyon. Here's where we have all these little junta-aligned ethnic militias that have been ordered to expand. And in the far north, the area where most of the China trade happens, we have both junta-aligned militias. We have the Kachin Independence Organization, Independence Army, which is allied with the Wa. So a really complicated situation. And we have the Burmese army then coming into Kokang. And we have a question mark with China because I don't know what China is really up to in this. They want, they don't want this wild, lawless, drug-infested border. They want the big investment projects, but they sure don't want massive refugee flows as the Burmese army comes in there to try to crush these various ethnic militias, although I don't think they are going to be crushed. Thank you, and I'd be very happy to take any questions that any of you might have.
You don't think they're going to be crushed?
Yeah, question is yes. I don't think that the WA is going to, the WA state army is going to, they have 25,000 troops. Now, the Burmese army has 400,000 troops. But this, there's a big canyon in the Salween River that the Burmese army has got to negotiate. It's very rugged topography. The WA know it very well, and the WA are extremely well armed. Now, the question is, are they going to be getting, how are they going to be replacing their weapons? You know, China has historically armed them. I don't know what's really happening with the arms now. A lot of it, I suppose, will depend on how effectively Burma can cut off that export of methamphetamine, but that's a very profitable trade, and it's not easy to cut off those sorts of highly profitable trades. So I'm sure there are people in Thailand and in China who are going to continue to smuggle out those drugs. Money's going to continue to come in. In the WA, you just look at this history. They have been fighting a long time, and I don't see how Burma has. I mean, what it would take is real help from China. I'd be very surprised if China would do that, but you know, we'll see. Yeah, Tom?
Is there something about the way the Burmese army operates that explains why they would have evacuated at such a scale? I mean, were these armies of extermination, or were they worried of simply being a police procedure where known drug czars would really stand a chance to be imprisoned? It's just so, I mean, to have that many people
just fleeing
completely abandon, territories. It seems incredible.
Yeah, there was quite a bit of looting that happened, but I think it took almost everybody aback that it was just hardly a shot fired. It was just Burmese army coming in and then people fleeing. Well, the tensions had been building for a long time, and putting the squeeze on their drug production and then ordering them to fold their militia into the Burmese army. I mean, people were just really worried. So that had been going on for a long time. And certainly the Burmese army can be very brutal. If you look at what they do, say, in the Karen refugee camps, Taylor, you might know something about that. Taylor spent time this summer in Karen refugee camps in Thailand. I mean, they'll go in and burn out those refugee camps. They've done that on many cases. So it's a very brutal army. People know that, I think. But still, it was to see the civilian population, basically. But it's not far to China. And these are Chinese people, so in a way, since that was pretty easy for them to do it. Now we'll wait to see what happens. Evidently, some have come back. Most of them have not, from what I've been able to gather from the news sources. Yes.
I'm curious about the market for the methamphetamine.
Yeah.
This is a fairly recent development, comparatively speaking, and where does that go?
Yeah, the methamphetamine is much more recent, say, than heroin. I'm pretty sure it really started up in the 80s, I believe, and then got much larger in the 90s up to the present time. Huge market in Thailand. I don't know, evidently quite a market in China. Eric, do you know about that, or Tom? Is there a big market for meth in China?
I think meth is supposed to be one of the main. I mean, I've heard of heroin addiction being kind of a subculture that the government doesn't talk about publicly very much. They don't know about meth, but it's very possible.
Especially in Southwest China, there has been problems, and it has been reported even in the official Chinese press over the past 10 years or so.
Yeah, and so it's building up, and China is very concerned about that. So Thailand and other parts of Southeast Asia seem to be the major markets. Now, I haven't read about it coming to the United States. I think we produce our own, and as of Mexico. Australia, very likely. Don't think much to Japan. Supposedly the heroin from this region now is mostly going to Australia, to China, to Southeast Asia. Afghans seem to have cornered the European market for heroin. But it is, the whole drug issue is it's also tied up with a lot of human trafficking, with sexual exploitation, and a pretty nasty situation in many areas. Yeah, Alexander?
So what degree is political corruption in Burmese politics and Burmese army issue to the extent that perhaps it is difficult to speak of the army or the Burmese government as a unitary actor that can really implement policies from the center as opposed to local conditions make it very difficult to stringently implement a policy because the army or local commands will do whatever the authority is.
Yeah, absolutely. And these local commanders of the Burmese army up in the Shan State, they're all involved in, well, I shouldn't say all, but most of them, as far as we know, are involved in drug running, so they have local connections. So while, I know you didn't explain this, while this northern area of Wa and Kokang really seeing the drug production cut down, that isn't true in the areas where these little militias loyal to Burma, no, they're still producing it unimpeded. And they're working with Burmese military officers almost certainly. So yes, there's a tremendous amount of corruption. And Burma is an odd state. They moved their capital a few years ago from Rangoon or Yangon up to Naypyidaw, this nowhere area in the central part of the country. And it seems to have been done on astrological grounds as much as anything else, but also because of perhaps paranoia on the part of the military officials that they don't want to be in a sophisticated urban area. They want to be in a remote rural area where they can totally control things. So I don't know much about the inner workings of the Burmese military, but certainly from what I've read, yes, tremendous amounts of corruption and drug
I have actually two questions. The first one is, how porous is the border between Burma and China right now? How much control does each country have over the border? So that's my first question. And the second question is about concerns a possible dual role that is currently being played by China. On the one hand, they're working with the Burmese government to squeeze out the drugs and clean up the place. But on the other hand, what is their relationship with the WA? Because I recall when these events were unfolding in August, I read, I think, a piece in the New York Times that said that a humanitarian refugee crisis was averted because China had already set up all the tents when the refugees came, the tents were already there.
I have read that China has equipment for hundreds of thousands of refugees if this really blows up all along the border. I have no idea if that's true or not. I have read very little of Chinese military operations along that border. I don't know, Tom, do you know anything about that? Yeah, are there Chinese troops near the border of Burma? I haven't read anything to that effect. I think the border is highly porous, but in many areas it's extremely rugged. There's been a lot of road building, and China has been putting money into that, as has the WA state itself. So they've had this very ambitious road building program, so it's much less remote than it used to be, and that's quite recent. But that, just from looking at Google Earth and flying around that border, the areas where it does have high level of resolution, there's a tremendous amount of cross-border movement. Although in some cases, in the northern area, supposedly the Chinese were trying to keep the gambling on their side of the border and not on the Burmese side. Yet on the WAS side, most of the gambling is on the Burmese side. So I guess a lot of this depends on precisely where you're looking on the border. But it's, the WAS state has been much more part of China than part of Burma. If you look at anything from investment patterns to how it's administered and to who the people are there, it doesn't work that way.
Did you come across anything that talks about, the WA is officially recognized co-national group in China.
One of the 55
Yeah, and so and the Palong is the Pulang, and so you have some of these recognized, and that complicates things because if the Wa, but I have no idea what Wa relations are. Meaning, that over time that the recognized groups in China, I mean, they're under a very different educational and propagandist regime, and inculcated into a whole different, national history and so forth than those on the opposite side of the border, and so therefore they kind of undergo different historical changes. But so now, but still they have these longer standing ethnic and linguistic connections, and that kind of complicates things.
All those ethnic groups in the Shan state are on the other side of the border.
Right,
They
a lot
are
right there.
Because it's this patchwork situation, and that was a constructed border. But all the reading I've done, I almost never come across anything linking these ethnic minority militias to their kin on the other side of the border. It just never comes up. And thanks for bringing that up. I hadn't even really thought about it, but it's obviously a very important issue. What is happening? It'd be a great thing for someone to go and do some research on to find out what's happening. I don't think there's much drug production on the Chinese side. I don't know if you come across. I think that's almost all on the Burmese side. But yeah, otherwise, I don't know. It would be really interesting to find out how that plays itself out. Are these groups in China? Again, I don't read much about any sort of ethnic rebellions or anything like that on the China side.
The War police. I mean, the War is like the quote that you have, the rebellious wild war. That's how they're referred to. I mean, they're considered to be the most, in like pejorative terms, they're understood to be the most primitive.
And the wild.
The wild. I mean, they are in the hierarchy of imagination on the lowest rungs of popular imagination and stereotypes about minorities.
Yeah, probably a lot of talk of head hunting in the 1800s. Yeah, same thing on this side. Well, that's probably actually something that redounds to their credit in some way. That helps build up their own internal strength, right? The people who've been so looked down upon by others. Because the Shan had the same view of them, and the Burmese as well. So, but now they got 25,000 troops, and they've got. And what I just find interesting is you start looking at their military leaders, though, and they're Chinese or they're half Chinese, half Hua. I mean, that's very common. So a lot of Chinese men, probably people involved in these nefarious activities of marrying Hua women, and their children are now often the military and political leaders. They're bicultural. So it's funny that you have this Hua state, which has been sort of a client of China.
What are the prospects for ecotourism? I mean, really not far from here, there are big NGOs that are really seriously developing.
Oh, we could have some serious adventure tourism.
Serious get shot at.
We could go and take up some weapons, run some drugs and guns. I bet there's some people would be interested in doing that. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And in another month, I'm hoping to do another of these talks on some other issue in some other part of the world. So I have recorded this, and I'll make a quick time movie, and I'll put it on my website. And I'm trying to get a YouTube channel which has these monthly productions. So I did Northern Iraq, and I did Slovakia and Hungary, and I have no idea what it'll be next. Just whatever news story piques my interest, I'll take it up and learn about it. So it has a high payoff for learning about the world. Not a very high scholarly payoff. I've enjoyed it.
I wonder if there's any application of I feel like China must be applying in some way the refugee technology or policies from the Korean border. Because I mean, if you look at like on the borders where they have the most experience with mass refugees, that's one of them.
Right.
And I wonder if a lot of these technologies kind of circulate, say, okay, this is working here, that was a disaster, and so
It was amazing how well planned they are.
yeah.
They were prepared for this.
As if they were planning.
Yeah, well, who knows what's going on in these negotiations.
I mean, everywhere.
I'll tell you one other thing.
It's a Pol Pot did that, but it was like, it was something quite different. It's amazing.
One thing this project has really made me think is we often talk about the crisis of newspapers, right? All newspapers are going bankrupt, but globally we are in a golden age. The Chance news agency, they're putting these articles up every day. High quality reporting, great website. I think that you can get today's news from the United Law State Army. Here it is. I'd like to go.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.